We're holding here in the Gemara Mesechta Megillah Daf Tes Zayin Amud Base 16b, and we're going to today and tomorrow be concluding the explanation on the Megillah from the Mesechta Megillah. We're going to, today and tomorrow will be the last time we'll be learning for 2 weeks. We'll be learning Gemara. Friday, Meish Hashem, will be Rabbi Darren, and then for the next 2 weeks we'll be off because there's kids are off of school. Then we'll be going away for a little bit. So for the next 2 weeks we'll be off. So we have today Wednesday, tomorrow Thursday, and then we have Friday will be Meish Hashem, Shiur, Rabbi Darren, and then we'll be off for 2 weeks. So we're going to finish over here in the Gemara the part about the Megillah. And we'll bring in a few of the explanations of Chassidus on the Megillah and some fascinating midrashim and sort of the epilogue of the Megillah. What happened to all the heroes of the Megillah, all the characters of the Megillah, and all the villains of the Megillah? What happened to them afterwards? At least the ones that we know about. So we'll continue over here talking about near the very end of the Megillah speaks how Mordechai and Esther instituted a Yom Tov holiday, an annual holiday for every single Jew to keep for the rest of eternity. And it's a very special miracle that will never be forgotten from the Jewish people. Mordechai and Esther wrote one letter, then they wrote a second letter to the Jews the next year. The Rashbam on the side of the Gemara, he actually has a nusach, he has a text attributed that he received, the text that Esther wrote to all the Jews in all of the nations and all the kingdom of Achashverosh. But she wrote to them, there's nothing more to be afraid. Achashverosh will not be harming us anymore. Mordechai is now second to the king. And Mordechai made all the Jews swear very strongly, a very strong oath, that they will never leave Purim. They'll always keep Purim. Because as time goes on, Jews have other problems in life and other problems throughout history that we've had. And it's possible you can forget the days of Purim. We learned Masechta Tainis, so many different holidays that the Jews kept Megillah's Tainis, and we don't keep them nowadays at all. We don't even have a memory to them. Only some of them are written down in Megillah's Tainis. So we made sure that the Jews should make an oath and swear that they will always keep Purim, like Mordechai and Esther said. And the remembrance of the fasts that they did should always remind them why it's so special to always remember Purim. The very last words of chapter 9 is V'nichtav b'sefer. It was inscribed in the book. Which book? We don't know. That book is missing from us nowadays. However, we do have a V'nichtav b'sefer. Esther did accomplish that the Megillah should become part of the Sifrei Tanakh, the books of Tanakh, one of the 24 holy writings. Next it says, Vayasem HaMelech Achashverosh Mas. Mike, Shalom Aleichem, hope you're feeling good. It says, the king Achashverosh made a tribute, a tax, on the islands of the sea and on the land. And yesterday we brought that there's many different islands where Achashverosh ruled, all the way to the Greek islands, and he made taxes in all of them, and he took away taxes from the Jewish people. Because he wanted to get on Esther's good side, So we said the Persians, who are his own nation, and the Jews, who are Esther's nation, don't have to pay taxes. He made everybody else pay tax.
Sounds good to me.
The Rokeach, remember him? Rokeach, he writes that Mordechai was in charge of collecting the taxes, and he says the Jews that were tzaddikim, righteous Jews, he did not allow taxes on. But the Jews who were what he calls leitzim, scoffers, those who would make fun of the whole thing. You think Purim was so miraculous? Nah, it was natural. Those Jews had taxes, and he brings a hint over here. If you look at the words, Al Haaretz V'yeh Hayam. Last letter of Al is Lamed. Last letter of Haaretz is Tzadik. Last letter of Iyeh, islands, is Yud. Last letter of Hayam is Mem, which make up the word Leitzim. Leitzim are scoffers. So Mordechai, he placed taxes on the scoffers, on these people. But he himself did not let the Chacham, the sages, pay any taxes. Achashverosh, when he saw that the Jews are Esther's nation, so now he was no longer scared the Jews are going to rebel against him, because now my queen is a Jew. He's not scared that the Jews, he became less paranoid. So he made a tax on the nations, but not the rest of the Jews. He wanted the rest of the nations to be scared of them and to feel subjugated to him. One of the reasons we brought down earlier why Achashverosh and Daf Yud Aleph was called Achashverosh is because everybody became poor in his days because he charged so much taxes on everybody. And Vai, everyone, Achashve, like Oy Vai, whoa, everyone was groaning from Achashverosh. Some say this is a Medrash of Tehillim. I brought this down earlier once, but bring down with a little more detail. It says in the beginning of his kingdom, Achashverosh ruled over the entire world. Matter of fact, he says he ruled over 257 countries. When he killed Vashti, most of the world rebelled against him. He was king over 127 countries. When he married Esther, 127 countries returned to Achashverosh in her merit, because she was connected to, she was sneeze like Sarah, who lived to be 127 years. And when Haman got killed and Mordechai became viceroy, all the other nations, meaning the 126 nations who did not return to Achashverosh, all returned to him. They said, we want to be on the winning team with a guy like Mordechai in second in command. So Achashverosh, now he received all these new provinces. Once again, he placed taxes on the new provinces. But this also could explain what it says right in the very first pasuk of the Megillah. By was the days of Achashverosh, so now we're up to the last pasuk. Who Achashverosh is Achashverosh? And the Gemara said in Daf Yud Aleph, Who Achashverosh perishoy mitchilasay vatsoifay. He was the same evil man in the beginning and the end. In the beginning, when he was king over the whole world, later on, when many nations rebelled against him and left, later on, when all these other nations returned to him, he was the same evil Achashverosh. To teach you how, sort of how low he was, even though he himself was going through what you could call hardships, he never changed. He was always the same terrible Achashverosh, the same evil person. Even when he was suffering, even when they're about to, says Russia, even when they're entering Gehenna, will never do teshuvah. We'll continue now with the Gemara. But the next passage of Megillah says, all his power, acts of power and might of Achashverosh, Mordechai, and the full account of Mordechai's greatness, Asher Gidlei HaMelech, which are written, and the king made him great. Halahim Ksuvim, they are not written. I'll say for Divrei Hayam L'Malchei Madei Paras in the book of Chronicles by the kings of Persia and Media. So the question is, where are these books today? We don't know. They were all destroyed. I'm going to bring up here on the screen. Let me share. I'm going to bring up over here. Here are some of the ancient forms of writing. There were two main forms of writing in the Persian Empire. They didn't have paper. They had parchment, or they had a parchment was very expensive. It was hide. It had papyrus and all the type of paper. And they would, or that's one way of writing. So it's sort of like a very flimsy type of paper. And the other way of writing was on stone. They would etch it in with ink. So here, Assyrian is Ashuri. Jewish people write in Ashuri. The ancient Jewish writing was, the alphabets looked like this. This is what a Sefer Torah looked like. It's a modern day writing, a Samaritan Sefer Torah, not really a valid Sefer Torah. Yassi. Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi.
So not really a valid Sefer Torah, but that's the old writings of a Sefer Torah. Later on, the Jews went and they started writing in Ashuri. Ashuri is a writing we have currently in a Sefer Torah, Hebrew as we know it. This is a mezuzah from the Samaritans and Har Grizim, an old mezuzah that they found. And they wrote it on a stone. It wasn't the kosher mezuzah, obviously, but it was written on a stone. Our form of writing is called Ashuri. Why is it called Ashuri? Because the Jews brought it from Assyria. During the Persian period, they took the script and they adopted it, and it became the standard Hebrew script, the one that we have today. But the most common language, like Dovi said at length, Dovi explained to us a few times, was Aramaic. That was the most common language.
It was used in the Persian Empire as the international language.
Right. But this is what the old Aleph and Beis, this is what it looked like. In Lachish, that's where in the days of the first Beis HaMikdash, the 10 tribes were exiled to Lachish. So they found this inscription written in ancient Hebrew. From the times of the first Beis HaMikdash, this is where the area of Lebanon today. All the Hebrew writings from the times of the first Beis HaMikdash are written in, it's called Ksav Ivri, Hebrew script, Paleo script.
Who changed it?
So Ezra, in the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash, he changed it to Ksav Ashuri. We're going to learn about Ezra very soon in the Gemara.
Yeah, I believe both in China and in Russia, there were very strong movements trying to change the alphabets, the regular Latin alphabet that we use.
Interesting.
And they didn't pass. The government didn't adopt those resolutions. But they figured that because it's very difficult for foreigners to read those languages in the native script.
Interesting. Another thing, the Gemara says in Mesechta Sanhedrin, Daf Chaf Aleph, that the Torah was actually given in Ksav Ashuri, in our Hebrew letters that we have. It was forgotten. Ezra reinstituted it. We're going to see very soon in the next few lines of the Gemara, after this part, that Ezra, he wasn't there by the building of the Beis HaMikdash. He stayed in Bavel. Why? He was busy learning Torah from Baruch ben Neriah. Remember Baruch ben Neriah, the one who, the Talmud, the student of Yirmiyahu? He was the one who wrote down Megillas Eicha about 15 years before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. It was burned. He went into exile, and he was too old or sickly to return to Eretz Yisrael to build the Beis HaMikdash. Perhaps it was a different reason. And he passed away a year after the Beis HaMikdash was finished being built. And we're going to see very soon in the Gemara how Ezra stayed with him extra. Ezra is called Ezra HaSofer, Ezra the scribe, because he taught the Jewish people once again how to write the Sefer Torah properly, the Ksav Ashuri, and it's just things that he learned from Baruch ben Neriah to write properly. So in general, so it's called Ashuri, Assyria, which was Sancheirav. That area, even after they were gone, is still called Ashur. And it says it brought Jews back.
How does the alphabet script differ from these?
Alter Rebbe's Ksav, if I understand, is different in minor details.
Wow.
Where you make a crown, where you make a hump on the ches, different details. Right. Alter Rebbe's Ksav, because there's different Ksav. Ksav Beis Yosef and Ksav Arizal. Each one has their own advantages, and Alter Rebbe's Ksav wants to implement all the advantages of both. That's what it is. But because it brings so many details from both, you have to be fluent in both other types of writing. Once you're fluent in other types, then you're able to start writing Alter Rebbe's Ksav. It's much harder to write. In general, it's more expensive as well.
But she don't teach Lubavitchers and apparently Ashkenazim actually, right? Many Ashkenazim, it should just stick to the Ksav of the Arizal.
Lubavitchers would generally always stick usually to Ksav Arizal. But nowadays it's become much more common to have Alter Rebbe's Ksav because more people know how to write it. Svarim about it. So now it's becoming more in common. Alter Rebbe's Ksav idea is that it incorporates the advantages of Ksav Arizal and Ksav of the Beis Yosef, but you have to really know what you're doing with it because you might think you're writing it right and it could be something is off.
So how did Hebrew originate? I mean, Avram spoke Hebrew.
Right. Avram Avinu spoke Hebrew.
Yeah. So, but
the entire world spoke Hebrew, Lashon Kodesh. That was the first language. It was only after the Dara Flaga, the Tower of Babel, Hashem spread them around the world and made their languages different. But until in the beginning of creation, the whole world only spoke in Lashon Kodesh, the holy tongue.
We see Adam said for his that she's an Isha, because you came from Ish, he was using Hebrew.
Right, Adam spoke in Lashon Kodesh.
Yeah.
Now, usually, when every art we have from those days, we have two scribes standing next to each other. One is using a stylus, like a sharp implement, and a tablet. Presumably, he's writing, it was called cuneiform, and the other one is writing with ink and parchment, which is presumably in Aramaic. And what we can assume is this was the archive method they had those days. That one would be writing on parchment. Well, one they wanted to preserve long term, so they would make clay, make it wet, and he would be copying what the first one wrote. So this is how they had a copy to save for the treasuries, which is how a lot of the documents we have are from the cuneiform ones because they're preserved till today.
The Egyptians also had actually two ways of writing. One was, because you see those
hieroglyphics,
and the other one was actually a more of a writing system actually that they had. And I guess that like ordinary people weren't going to be.
So we're talking about Egypt. The big difference of these two types of writing. So he's writing with a quill and parchment. He's writing cuneiform and clay. Big difference between the two of them is what would happen if a fire happened, if it got burned. So the parchment would burn. The clay ones wouldn't burn, they would just get hardened, they become more solid. So therefore nowadays, many things happen. Alexander, he went and he destroyed Shushan and Persepolis, he destroyed the treasuries, he burnt it to the ground. So everything that was written then, including, I'm assuming, the Sefer Divrei Hayamim, and the Chronicles of the King are all burnt. But whatever is written in cuneiform was found. So in Shushan, for example, not a single piece of parchment was found, but thousands of tablets were found. So we know a lot of our resources and details that we know about the palace and about Achashverosh and about everything is from these things that remained. Also, in Shushan, it rains from time to time, it gets wet. So parchment, if it's not stored properly, it will get destroyed by the elements. In Persepolis itself, the other palace of Achashverosh, they found 30,000 clay tablets with things written on it. Not a single piece of papyrus or parchment has been found there. Because it won't, even if it survived, it wouldn't survive the elements. They did find and these are written mainly in different languages, Persian, Syrian, but Aramaic was found written on the different jugs and different parts of Achashverosh's palace. certain picture I wanted to bring. Where is it? Here it is. Here is a ksuba, an old ksuba, written in Aramaic on papyrus. This is written in Yud Ches Tammuz. It's a Hebrew date. In the 16th year of King it's assuming Daryavish, the king after Achashverosh. Achashverosh's son.
The valid one, or was it made by?
No, it's logically valid. Sure.
I was wondering because, like, you had actually,
The details that we have nowadays, you have to have a long nun and a bold yud. Those details weren't really around back then.
because the Jews were divided into different factions. You had the Hellenists and the
Right.
So I was wondering if it was electrically valid or not.
In Egypt is a very dry place. Doesn't really rain too much. Therefore, many parchments and many pieces of papyrus from the times of Achashverosh, because it was under his rule, survived. So a lot of the things that we know about the Jewish people during the times of Purim, we know from things that were found in Mitzrayim.
Mhm.
For example, in Cairo, there's a Geniza. A Geniza is a place where you store old Sfarim, old books, old tefillin, Sefer Torah. And the Geniza that they had over there in Cairo was sort of like a large chimney stack, taller than this building, very, very tall. And they just, over the years, they would once in a while climb up and throw things down. For about over 1,000 years, they use this Geniza in Cairo. And because it's so dry, and even when it rained, only went to the very top layer, about 120 years ago, they started taking apart. Collectors started going into the Cairo Geniza, taking it apart, trying to sell. But many things, writings of Rishonim, original handwritings of the Rambam's drawing of the menorah, were all found in the Cairo Geniza. Because the climate in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, is a very good climate, sort of like the Dead Sea climate, where they also papyrus and parchment are kept for thousands of years. There's no moisture in the air. So over here, this town over here, ancient town in Egypt, it's called Elephantine. It's in Mitzrayim, and there was a Jewish soldiers to the Persian army were over here. And they found over there letters written in parchment that Daryavish, the son of Achashverosh, who took over, he writes permission in big detail about how the Jews and Jewish soldiers are allowed to keep Pesach. And he has a name Yedanya, Hananya. So says King Darius, the 5th year of King Darius, Daryavish, which is this is the 4th year, middle of building the Beis HaMikdash. This is 6 years after Achashverosh died. And he gives him permission to make a Yom Tov with unleavened bread in the month of Nisan and Pesach. And he goes to all the details. Clean your house, don't drink any beer for the entire time. And so these papers were here. So when it says that the Megillah says that Achashverosh sent out his decree to all the Jews, in all according to their writings, we could assume it refers to the Aramaic language, the different languages that they had. Let's back to the Gemara. So the last pasuk of the Megillah, the last verse of the Megillah says, "Ki Mordechai Yehudi, Mordechai the Jew, Mishneh LaMelech Achashverosh, was viceroy to King Achashverosh, the Gadol HaYehudim, great among the Jews, Ratzu L'Roevecha, accepted by most of his brethren, Doidesh Tov La'amai, seeking the good of his people, V'Doiver Shalom L'Chol Zarei, and speaking peace to all of their seeds, all of their descendants." Imagine, Dovi, you were once, I guess, a CEO of a company, and after you retire or you make a big dinner, and then someone gets up and it says, "Oh, he was so great. Most of the board of directors liked him." How does that sound?
I would be perhaps actually not able to finish the rest of my dinner. Is somebody here doesn't like me?
So what is the Gemara saying over here? And Mordechai was accepted by most of his brethren and most of the Jews. What type of thing is the Megillah saying? Right. So what's going on? What's going on? What is the Megillah saying? Why does it have to say it? What's important for us to know? So the Gemara is going to solve that mystery over here. Says the Gemara, Mordechai Yehudi for Mordechai the Jew. This is on 16b4.
16b4.
Last paragraph of the first column.
B4 who? Okay.
Mishnah Lamelech Achashverosh was second to King Achashverosh. V'gadol Yehudim, great among the Jews. We'll get to why that's important. V'ratzi l'roiv Echav, accepted by the majority of his brethren. The Gemara says, l'roiv Echav v'loi l'chol Echav. Mordechai was accepted only by most of his brethren, not all of his brethren. There were some Jews who did not accept Mordechai. Who were they?
Heretics.
Melamed, it comes to teach you, Shapirshu Mimenu Miktsas Sanhedrin. After Mordechai accepted the position of second in command, and now he's by the king all the time, some of the Sanhedrin, the high court, the Sinai, the leaders of the Jewish people, legally, spiritually, separated from Mordechai. Echav means his brothers. Brother means someone who's on your same caliber, either a physical brother or someone who's on the same level as you. So it means someone who's on the same level of Mordechai separated from Mordechai. Not a regular Jew, but the Sanhedrin separated from him. Mordechai, we said before, Daf Yud Gimel, the story of Bigsan and Seresh. He was a member of Sanhedrin, who knew all 70 languages. He sang in Lishkas Agazis. So some of the members of Sanhedrin separated from Mordechai because now Mordechai is not learning Torah properly. Until now, Mordechai, he woke up at 3 a.m. and he had a share of learning. And then at 6 a.m., he gave a Daf Yomi shir. At 7 a.m., he gave a Chassidus shir. 9 a.m., at 8 a.m., he davened. At 9 a.m., had a Medrash shir. At 10 a.m., had a Gemara shir.
It was discovered by archaeologists.
Right. And now Mordechai at 7 a.m., he has a meeting with the financial ministry. At 11 a.m. is a meeting with the Department of the Military, Department of Defense. At 12 a.m. is a meeting with the Minister of Agriculture. At 2 p.m. he has a meeting with the king. Now suddenly Mordechai has a long day, hard day, stressful job. He's not learning like he used to. And he's coming home at 11 o'clock at night. Sure, he sat and learned at 11 o'clock at night as well. But now he's no longer sitting and learning Torah like he used to. So some of the members of Sanhedrin separated themselves from him, for he neglected his Torah study as a result. And the next Gemaras, the next few Gemaras, as a matter of fact, will speak and explain from actually now until the rest of the Amud and into even the next Amud. And in truth, even till the end of the parak, it's all going to talk about the idea of the greatness of Talmud Torah, of learning Torah. The whole end of the parak, the end of the chapter, will be speaking about Yaakov Avinu and his years. And just like in the Megillah, we're going through pasuk by pasuk, verse by verse, showing how unique and exact every single thing is. We're also going to have the same thing in the Gemara, will do the same thing with the Chumash, showing you how exact every word and every nuance in Chumash is, to teach you how Yaakov learned Torah for 14 years in the house of Shem and Aver, saying how important learning Torah is. Ezra did not go to build the Beis HaMikdash. When the Jews went to build the Beis HaMikdash, he stayed to learn Torah in Bethel by Baruch ben Uriah, till Baruch ben Uriah passed away. It's more important to learn Torah than to build the Beis HaMikdash. It's more important to learn Torah than to save lives, because we'll see about that soon, depending what type of saving life. There's active saving life. Someone's in danger, obviously go save their life if you're busy learning Torah. But if you see somebody but to be in a situation where you generally have to save life, that's like, for example, during the Holocaust, and you could run papers, make papers and save lives. Learning Torah might be bigger than that, actively saving the life of something else. But we'll get all into that in the Gemara.
Was Joseph criticized when he was in the Egyptian government? Didn't he?
That was a big disagreement between Joseph and his brothers. Could we be in the world and still be a tzaddik, or be someone who learns Torah the whole day? And this was the difference between Mordechai and the rest and other members of Sanhedrin. Only some of the members of Sanhedrin separated from him, but still were a lot of members of Sanhedrin which were on board with Mordechai. We'll get into all these details. It says learning Torah is greater than kibbud av v'em, honoring your father and mother. You're allowed to leave your parents to honor in order to learn Torah. If someone wants to learn Torah by one teacher and his father wants him to go to a different teacher, he could say, "I want to go to the teacher where I'm going to learn better."
I was about to mention that actually, that you can disobey your parents if it is you feel that actually one yeshiva should be better for you than another one.
But your parents say, "I don't want you to go to that city because there is danger in that city from the non-Jews, Arabs." You're allowed to say, "I want to go here to learn Torah." Right? When it comes to learning Torah, there's also it's greater than kibbud av v'em, honoring your parents. Now, the Rabbi Jonathan says, don't God forbid think that Mordechai stopped learning Torah. It says Mordechai yatzim lifnei hamelech. Mordechai went out in front of the king. Mordechai went out to teach Torah. Rather, what it means is he wasn't able to learn Torah with the same concentration that he learned before, because now he has the fears of a whole kingdom on his head. And so he has much less concentration. Therefore, his quality of Torah learning went down. Now, Mordechai, okay, we're 20 minutes left for today. So first, what we'll do is let's do a little bit of epilogue. After the story of Purim, what happened? What happened to Achashverosh? Let's go into the handy pictures. What happened to Achashverosh? So Achashverosh, a year after the Purim story, meaning 2 years after the Purim story, a year after Mordechai and Esther instituted Purim, Achashverosh died. Now, did he die? Perhaps he was assassinated. Some say he was assassinated by his son.
That's a nice thing.
Not really a. Here is a tablet. It's in the British Museum today about the assassination of Xerxes, which, according to many opinions, is Achashverosh. Right, so that he was assassinated, maybe by his own son. He was killed. So it seems from Targum Sheni, that Achashverosh died and very young. It wasn't. It was untimely, so it could be he was killed. The Persian kings from that time are buried in a place today called Nakash-i Rustam, not far from Achashverosh's other palace in Persepolis. And there's a beautiful tomb, a beautiful elaborate burial place where the kings were buried, and there's 4 places in there, and only 2 of them have names. One is a name of Achashverosh's father, Daryavesh, and the other ones don't have names. Now let me see a picture of it. Let me see if I get a picture of it. There's an inscription over there. There's a drawing of the king giving thanks to his idol, and his figures supporting him. And it describes in great detail on this grave, saying all the great things that he accomplished in his kingdom and how many countries he ruled. And whoever sees it is going to see the picture. Oh, here it is. So here is the burial place of the royal tombs. 1, 2, 3. There's a 4th one around the bend. And the one over here is Daryavish of Achashverosh's father. So we could assume Achashverosh was buried over here in this one, or in the other one, but we could assume he's buried in the one next to his father. Over here in Daryavish, this is Darius, you see all this writing saying how great his kingdom was, how many countries he ruled over. And it tells you that this is the burial place of King Daryavish, King Darius, and here are all these people, all the nations subjugated to the king, and the king himself giving thanks to his God. So that's what happened with Achashverosh. He was succeeded by his son, Daryavish. He's called Artaxerxes in Artax. I can't pronounce it. Artaxerxes in English.
It would actually be Greek.
It would be a Greek name.
What is it? What the
In
Greek
Hebrew-
would be calling him. Xerxes is what the Greeks called.
His son is
Yeah.
Artaxerxes. Okay.
Yeah,
In Ezra, he's called by the name Artaxerxes.
that would probably.
Artaxerxes. It's actually the word with the biggest gematria in Tanakh. And as he's called Daryavish, Darius after his grandfather. He's called Artaxerxes, and he's called Koresh. The three different names that he has. He allowed the Jews to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, and he built a wall around Yerushalayim. During his time, Ezra and Nehemiah returned to Eretz Yisrael and started leading the Jewish people.
He would be Jewish after, right?
So, was he actually Jewish? That's a very good question. Was Daryavish actually Jewish? So, according to many understandings of many Chachamim, he was a son of Esther and Achashverosh. And Esther was taken to the king's palace in the 7th year of his reign. And so Achashverosh was king for 14 years. That means he could have maximum been only about 7 years old when he became king. And when he's 8 years old, he already lets the Jewish people build the Beis Hamikdash. And it's not such a chiddush. There was a king of France who became a king when he was 4 or something.
Mhm.
And he made a decision to colonize America when he was like a kid of 6 years old. So that's according to the understanding that it's the son of Esther from Achashverosh. He was a king for 32 years. And then the Persian Empire continued a little bit longer, and until about, I think 12 years after that, it was conquered by the Greeks. Was Esther, we learned before that according to the Zohar, Esther never had relations with Achashverosh until that time that Esther had to go present herself to Achashverosh later on. And every time Esther brought a shade, a spirit, or a demon to be together with Achashverosh instead of him. Look at the words of the Megillah. It's actually hinted to in several places in the Megillah. The Belzer Rebbe, talking about the first Belzer Rebbe, he brings that, it says over here, when Mordechai is telling Esther, go to Achashverosh, and he says, Al tadami v'nafsheich limalei beis hamelech mikol haYehudim. Don't imagine to yourself, hear these words, that you will escape in the king's house from sharing the fate of all the Jews. So Tidami says, don't think that you could do the trick you've always done until now, meaning that Esther brought a shade, a spirit, to take her place whenever she had to be intimate with Achashverosh. You yourself have to be involved now in the story in order to save the Jews. Why? Because if you send a shade, if you send the spirit, the demon, like you did in the past, a rescue will come for the Jews from somewhere else. Makam acher, if you learn Tanya, most of you are familiar with the term, Sitra achra, the other side. Acher means the other, not holiness. Makam acher means the side not of holiness. If you don't do it yourself, the salvation of the Jews will not be coming from you, Esther, from holiness and Kedusha. Rather, it will be coming from Klippa, Mimakam Acher, from the place of Acher, from the place of Klippa, from Sitra Achra. Therefore, you yourself have to do it to make sure that the Jews are saved from Kedusha, from holiness. And it says, so therefore, from this union of Achashverosh and Esther, that's how Daryavish was born. But Daryavish was born, he would only be 2 years old when he became king then, 3 years old when he let the Beis HaMikdash be built.
There could have possibly been the shade that the mother is saying then, right?
And it says in Seder HaDairos, Rabbi Chiel, one of the great Rishonim, written in Ruach HaKodesh, that Daryavish was 7 years old when he became king. So Mina Esther will become pregnant right in the beginning of her time with Achashverosh. So perhaps we could answer this question in a different type of way. It says in the Medrash that when Esther heard the news of when Mordechai is going with sackcloth and ashes, it says over here in verse Dalet about Tischach, the queen was extremely terrified. We learned in Gemara, pure Senida, she had a menstrual seeing because she became so scared. The Medrash says, she miscarried from hearing the news. Who was she pregnant from? And it says after she miscarried, she never had a child again, says the Medrash. I hope you could hear it. See.
It says internet connection is unstable.
Right. I think something with the computer, not with the internet connection. Maybe Dovi could work on that.
Oh, but we're capable of doing that.
So you must say that Esther was actually born from according to the Medrash, Esther was actually born from King Achashverosh from an earlier time. So in these two opinions would disagree.
That's actually Daryavish. She would. Does after the miscarriages?
So the Eitz Chaim from the Arizal, Chaim Vital writes Eitz Chaim. He says like this. Esther, he describes the whole thing in spiritual terms. Esther was actually bringing down a child when she had a child, and it was not Esther who was intimate with the king, it was a shade. But the child perhaps was born from Esther, and it's the idea of klipas noiga. A klipa, is shalosh klipas atmei. It's a 3 impure klipas, and klipas noiga, a klipa which has good and bad potential for either one. And therefore, Mordechai and her together, when they would send the shade, they would use the names of Hashem to send a demon in the form of Esther Tachashverosh. It was actually not really a child of Esther; it was really a child of the shade. That's how Daryavish was born. But since it's born through Esther, therefore it's considered to be like a child of Esther. But he wasn't a full klipa, was klipas noiga. He was half good and half bad. He was not Jewish, but he let the Jews build the Beis HaMikdash. That's what the Eitz Chaim, from the Rizal, Chaim Vital, that's what it seems like he says.
Actually, what's interesting is that may have halachic ramifications, because nowadays you have where you can have a womb transplant, right? So that's a big is the child. A Jewish, who is the mother, actually the Goyish woman who gave the womb to the Jewish woman. The Rabbanim today have their hands full of these type of questions. It's not for us mere mortals.
Right. It says over here back here in the Megillah.
So you're saying the Shadim can become pregnant?
No, yeah, that's what it says. The Rambam says that they're able to, and the Mishnah says that. In some ways, they're similar to people, that they could reproduce, have children.
Do they have a corporeal body?
According to Medrash, according to Mishnah, Gemara, it seems like a very physical thing. If you want to see the Gemara Mesechta Brachos, gives you, if he says you want to see them, it tells you how to see them. They say that from the times of the Baal Shem Tov or Rabbi Baal Shem, he sent them all away from inhabited places. No people will meet them. People are not able to handle the fright of seeing them nowadays. But it seems like from the Gemara and the Medrash that it's actually a very physical thing. Why does the Megillah over here mention all of the power and might of Achashverosh is written down? Achashverosh gave a tax, and all of his might is written down. What's that important for us to know? In the Megillah, it's important to know how powerful Achashverosh was. There was no escape for the Jews. There was nowhere for the Jews to run. And when the Megillah wanted to write something negative about Achashverosh, they couldn't write that. He was still in power. And even afterwards, his son the Daryavish was in power. Whenever they wanted to write something negative about Achashverosh in the Megillah, they had to do it in a very hinted type of way. So they're saying Achashverosh's great power was that he put a tax on everybody. That's what his great power was. Meaning that he wasn't a beloved king. He used his power, instead of helping people improve economically, instead of trying to build roads, he did it just to make his own power, to make himself stronger, to make himself like sort of Rechavam, the son of Shlomo, who just decided to crack down on the people, give high taxes, and make the people rebel. So it's trying to say something negative about the Achashverosh in a type of way, which the Megillah would not say something straight out. Now, if Mordechai was so humble, it says he was like Moshe Rabbeinu. He was not somebody who would get offended if his friends, if some of the members of Sanhedrin left him. Mordechai did not want honor. Why does it say Ufarashas Gdulas Mordechai, the greatness of Mordechai? We'll bring maybe tomorrow a explanation of the Rebbe according to Chassidus. So Mordechai cannot have. Rabbi says that he did not abandon his Torah learning, just he couldn't concentrate on it in the same manner that he used to in the past. Moshe Rabbeinu, however, he was humble, but even though he was humble, when it came time to speak Musar strongly to the Jewish people, he didn't hold himself back. He didn't say, who am I, what am I to speak to the Jews? Whole Chumash Devarim was talking about Musar to the Jews. He didn't use that humbleness to get in his way of doing good. Humility was only there for in comparison to Hashem, or you think someone else like me would have been greater. So in a similar sense, Mordechai, even though it says is a halacha and called the parish and move parish. If you find something on the street, you don't know if it comes from a kosher store or not, or a non-kosher store, and you find a piece of meat on the street. So if there's more kosher stores in the city, you could assume it's kosher. If there's more non-kosher stores in the city, you could assume it's non-kosher. Called the parish, meruba parish. It comes from the majority. People's opinions are the same thing. So most of Mordechai's brethren approved of him, even though some did not, because he was busy with being with a king. But we don't say that those people who did not approve of him were nullified regarding to the ones who did approve of him, because these are members of Sanhedrin, great people. The Gemara will soon bring how Mordechai went from number 4 to number 5. What happened to Mordechai and Esther? Mordechai and Esther, different opinions. What exactly happened to them? We could assume that they went back to Eretz Yisrael afterwards. Although in Hamadan in Syria, there's a grave. Not Syria, Hamadan in Iran, there's a grave. A tradition is given to Mordechai and Esther. Well, we know clearly Mordechai was involved in building the second Beis Hamikdash. It's brought straight in Ezra. We're going to have that a pasuk soon in the Gemara about that. The original capital of Media was Hamadan, and that's where they say Mordechai and Esther are buried. There's a custom to visit their graves before Purim. This is the grave of Mordechai, attributed at least to Mordechai and Esther. Let me make this large. So there's a small shul on the outside of it. And these are, you have to go through a small door, and here are inside the big shrine of Mordechai and Esther. Very beautiful place. It's kept up very nicely. But practically, isn't Mordechai and Esther, why would Mordechai go back to Persia? Well, he was second in command to Ahasuerus, and he always had to advocate for the Jews. So why would Mordechai go back there? Now, what exactly actually happened to Mordechai? If you remember, we're learning about the Beis HaMikdash. We had Shar Shushan, the gate of Shushan, in the Beis HaMikdash. The gate right opposite the Holy of Holies was on the eastern side of the Beis HaMikdash. And it was a big drawing, a big relief of Shushan on that gate. Why? Because the kings of Shushan gave permission to build the Beis HaMikdash. And they said, you have to honor Shushan, honor the capital, and they made, and even today you can recognize the area of Shar Shushan, the Shushan gate in the Hatzvi-Bais. The Gemara in Mesechta Psachim says, why did they have the Shushan drawing capital on the Beis HaMikdash? So two opinions, Rav Chisda and Rav Yitzchok, and one of the opinions was that we should always remember to give respect, due respect to the ruling monarchy, to Shushan. Or the other opinion is you should always remember your sins. You remember what we did because we sinned. We were exiled to Shushan. We had 70 years of exile. So to remember the Jews, in order to remind them to constantly, not to fall back on their sins the way before. And they made it on top of the gate. But Mordechai, and so in the second year of Daryavish, 4 years after the story of Purim, in the year from creation, 408. 70 years after the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, they rebuilt the second Beis HaMikdash. On Chav Daled Elul, they started building the Beis HaMikdash. Chav Daled Kislev, Chav Daled Elul, they collected materials. Chav Daled Kislev, they started building it. And it took 4 years to build the second Beis HaMikdash. Mordechai, when they started building the Beis HaMikdash, he left everything in Shushan, all of his greatness. He went to Yerushalayim. That's where he really wanted to be the entire time. And he lived a very long life. He says that he lived a long life in the merit that there was Binyamin. There's someone called Binyamin who was a tzaddik. He supported a woman and 7 children for 7 years, and his life was lengthened for 22 years as a merit for helping a woman and 7 children, supporting them. So Mordechai saved all the Jews, men, women, and children. He lived a very long life, and as a matter of fact, he lived all the way through the story of Hanukkah, all the way till the end of the Hashmonaim. So until Hordus, till King Herod.
Oh, that would be hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years. It could be almost 400 years he lived. The Seder Adaris, from one of the Rishonim, he writes that Mordechai lived more than 400 years. And it's called Psachia. And the name Psachia is brought down with the Hashmonaim kings. And he says that there was a fight, if you remember, between Hyrcanus and Isterbulis, 2 of the kings of the Hashmonaim. One was on the inside of the city, one is the outside of the city. And they sent a pig to the Beis HaMikdash. And on the 17th of Tammuz was one of the tragedies of that day. The whole city, the walls of Yerushalayim shook when he sent the pig into the walls. And it says Mordechai was killed during the violence between these 2 kings. So Mordechai lived a very long life, the merit of saving so many Jews. Mordechai was a member of Sanhedrin from the first Beis HaMikdash, Meaning Sanhedrin, you have to be over 30, you have to be respected, 70 years of exile, all the way till the time period of the end of the Hashmonai kings, after the story of Hanukkah. And Mordechai's wisdom in the Beis HaMikdash was very well known, was very legendary. One of the hardest Mesechtas to learn is Mesechta Kinim, about the bird karbanas, bird sacrifices in the Beis HaMikdash. It gets very complicated. And Mordechai, there's a calculation that says that Mordechai was already 60 years old. To be part of Sanhedrin, you have to be over the age of 60, you have to be a zakin, an elder. It's mitzvah to appoint an elder. And if Mordechai was 60, but when he went into Galus, at least 60, went into Galus 11 years before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, Mordechai must have been, and also there was a system to go from, there were 3 Sanhedrins in the Beis HaMikdash, one in the outer court, one in the inner court, and then one by the Mizbeach. And you had to be advanced from one to the other. And so you would take a senior dayan, a judge from your city, advance him to the outer court, to the inner court, to the next court. So if Mordechai made it all the way to Sanhedrin, he must have been already very old previously, because he only put in Sanhedrin the lowest one, someone who's over 60. And Mordechai comes out, he was 60, and by the time of the miracle of Purim, it's possible he was over 100, maybe 138, and if he lived to be the end of the Hashmonai period, he could have been already over 400 years old. But as many halachas, if the birds got mixed up with each other, any hard questions in the Beis HaMikdash, it would come to Mordechai, and it happened several times that would have to come to Mordechai to answer the questions, and that's why he's called Psachia, was his other name. Psachia means he would open up, and he would open up any dilemmas, he would open up their minds. When the 2 brothers of Yerushalayim, two Hashmonai brothers, Hyrcanus and Esther, were fighting with each other, one of the brothers was in Yerushalayim, the other one made a siege around Yerushalayim and destroyed all of the fields in the whole vicinity of Yerushalayim, and it came the time to bring the Karban Omer. And remember, Mordechai had a special connection to the Karban Omer. Mordechai was teaching the kids about the Karban Omer, right? On what day? On the 2nd day of Pesach, the day you bring the Karban Omer, the Michas Omer. And now it's many generations later, and Mordechai is a member of Sanhedrin. He's inside Yerushalayim, and the other Hashmonai brother is having a siege around Yerushalayim. And now it's the 16th of Nisan, 2nd day of Pesach, and all the fields around Yerushalayim were destroyed by Hyrcanus, and Hyrcanus was outside, and he brought the Roman legionaries to help him to try conquering his brother Aristobulus. Where they're going to get wheat for the Omer. So there was one person who was mute, couldn't speak, was able to hear, and with his Gemara Mesechta Sukkah says that he showed them on a certain roof of a certain place, of like a sukkah, of a hut. They didn't understand what they were trying to understand what this person is saying. He's pointing to a roof of a hut. So they asked Mordechai what to do, and he told them he's trying to tell you a hint. There's a place called Gagas Tzrifin. The Tzrifin means the huts, the roofs of huts, or Tzrifin Gagas, where they would make roofs for huts. And over there, you should look for wheat. And they went over there and they found wheat. Barley, and they made the Karban Omer. So Mordechai was always connected to the idea of the mitzvah of Karban Omer. So eventually, Mordechai, during that time, they asked him, and he brought it. The same thing happened that same year when he came to Shavuos. He bring the shtei alechem of wheat, didn't know where to bring it from. And again, the same mute man pointed to a certain area. He pointed to, there was a hole in the door which was meant for a hinge, and they pointed to it. It's called the Sikra. And they asked Mordechai what to do, and he told them there's a place called Ein Socher, and they went over there and they found the wheat for the Shtei HaLechem. Another story of Mordechai is that 3 women came each to the Beis HaMikdash. Each one brought 2 birds to the Beis HaMikdash, and they got mixed up with the birds. Each one said it's for my karban, and each one had a different karban, but the karbanas were completely different. One is for a count of 7 days, one is for a count of 1 day, one is a count of many days. And Mordechai asked him exactly what the halacha is, and he realized one of the women is making a mistake. Mordechai explained, and they checked, and they realized exactly what he said was actually true. So when they saw how great Mordechai is, all the sages said, the time is already up, we're over time now. If anybody wants to go, I'm not going to hold anybody. And said his name is Psachia, because Pesach, he's able to open up everyone's minds and open up his mouth and say there's all the mysteries which nobody knows. They called him Bilshan. We're going to have in the Gemara. Bilshan means Lashon. He had many languages. He lived very long. And where he's buried exactly, we don't know for a fact where he's buried. In Seder Adoris, it says that they brought Mordechai back to Shushan, to Elam, in order to get buried. Is another sefer, which someone who traveled in Yerushalayim many years ago says that not too far from a shul in a certain town in Eretz Yisrael, that's where the kever of Mordechai and Esther are. Some say that he's buried in Seder Darius. Says that he's buried in Shemron, from Rabbi Yamin of Toledo. You know, he's one of the earliest Jewish explorers. Mm-hmm. He's buried in Shemron in Samaria, near Hamadan. However, there's 2 different versions of Rabbi Yamin of Toledo's writings. The other one, he says he's buried in Hamadan, which is in Iran nowadays, which we saw the beautiful cave of Mordechai and Esther. So, where Mordechai and Esther exactly are buried, we don't know. Where their bodies are buried, we do know where they are buried. Where they are not buried, where they are alive, and that is in the Megillah, in the Mesechta Megillah. However, on Purim, there is a custom, and the place in Hamadan where Mordechai and Esther's tomb is, all the Jews of Hamadan come in Erev Purim and daven over there. If you pay enough money to a certain staka, they'll have someone daven for you on Purim over there in Hamadan in Iran. But on Tainis Esther, everyone will gather together, all the Jews of Hamadan, and daven over there, and have many different minhagim, many different things that they would do. So that concludes, you could say, the story of the Megillah. However, this does not conclude our explanations of the Megillah. I'll have a few more tomorrow, and we'll learn a little bit more about some of the other aspects and details, the how and the what and the why. And that will be our last share on the Gemara until after we come back. So